Hi, my name is Kelly Crawford. I'm the Public Engagement Coordinator for the Baptist Association, and I'm here with Peter Keegan today, who is the Director of Advocacy for Baptist World Aid Australia. And it's his team that is responsible for the Ethical Fashion Guide, which you may or may not have seen in your circles or on the news. And Baptist World Aid is actually a partner in the Consumed campaign, which we've been talking about, that's been running for the past 2 years. And I'm here with Peter today talking about fashion and talking about, in some ways, our enslavement to passions and pleasures, or this idea that maybe the things that we consume or the way that we consume, we do it without a real understanding of who's at either end. And so I have a question for you, Peter. Is fast fashion a part of our problem as humans?
Yeah, look, I think all of our purchasing decisions tell us something about the way we imagine how we live in the world. And I think one of our biggest problems in the way we've structured our lives, the way we've structured our societies and our economies, is that we've bought into this idea that our own decisions just stand alone, that they don't have an impact on anybody else. And that the things that we buy, whether they be garments, whether they be fashion items, or whether they be other things as well, that they come from almost some mythical place, somewhere else. And then we have them for a period of time and then they disappear into some other mythical place called away. That we imagine ourselves to be disconnected from the somewhere else who made them and somewhere else who have to deal with what happens with them after we're done. So we lose that sense that we sit in this connected set of relationships where people have planted seeds and harvested different crops and then spun and weaved and produced that into clothing that gets transported and sold to us, and ultimately we have it for a period of time before we then get rid of it. And so we need to come back to that sense of a recognition that there's not somewhere else in a way. There's a whole set of human relationships, and when we make decisions to buy things, whether that's clothing or whether that's other things, our decisions immediately put us into relationship with all the people that are in that supply chain.
So is that the lie that we've been held captive to in our purchasing, whether it's fashion or something else? Is the lie that we've been held captive to this idea that we can do it without the human relationship side of things, or that there isn't a way or a mythical somewhere? Yeah, it's kind of an interesting idea to explore. What are those lies that we're held captive to when we make these decisions?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that is the core of the lie here, that the people who touch the products that we buy are hidden from us. And I think that actually the whole biblical story has a lot to say about that. I'm really impressed as I read through the Old Testament and into the New Testament that constantly we're getting this sense of God saying, nobody's away. Nobody's hidden. Nobody's outside of the scope or the view for what we should be thinking about in the relationships that we care about. Our neighbor is not, caught up in some technical definition of who's in or out. In fact, the examples that Jesus gives when he's asked about who our neighbor are all about exploding those categories and saying, the people that you don't normally see, the people who are hidden from you, the people that you don't recognize your relationship with, they're your neighbor too. So I think that is a core part of the lie, this sense that we can be disconnected, that we can imagine that the people who've made our clothes or our food or the other items that we're buying are not our neighbor, that we don't have a responsibility to them, that our purchasing decisions are not actually transactions of relationship between people who have used the creative gifts that God's given them to produce something and us who are buying products for good reasons. We don't buy clothing. We buy clothing for good reasons. We need it to protect our bodies. We need it to keep ourselves warm, to protect us from the elements. We use it in a way to express some of our creativity to the world and some sense of our identity. And all those things are fine. All those things are good. But we need to make sure we don't lose sight of the fact that sits within this web of relationships.
You've answered my next question, because you've painted, I guess, this picture, this other world where, everybody we do touch other people and our decisions do have effects and consequences. But that doesn't necessarily mean we can't enjoy fashion or we can't enjoy goods, but it's the reality of, has that person at the other end been paid a livable wage? Have they been empowered to use their skills, or are they're kind of affected by just this industry potentially that doesn't see them as human, and we don't see them as human because we don't see them at all? And so can you expand on that a little bit? Like, I'm not big into fashion, but I know I really respect people that are, and they can do it well, and they look beautiful. But can you still enjoy it? Can you still enjoy fashion, or does the whole thing just come at too great of a cost?
No, I think there's absolutely space for still enjoying that. I think God created us with a sense of creativity, with a desire to see beauty and experience and create beauty in the world, and all those things. Fashion can be a vehicle to express them. So there's nothing inherently wrong with engaging in fashion. The problem comes, as you said, is when we find ourselves disconnected from the people involved and from the natural resources that are going into those products as well. And I think that's an important element to keep in mind also, that there's a relationship with the natural world that comes in the fibers that are used in our clothes, the ways that chemicals and dyes may have been injected into them, and what happens next with them, and even what we do next with our clothes once we're done with them. So it's shifting from a mindset of consumption, that we're just there to buy as many things as we possibly can, or things that we might only wear once and then discard, to thinking much more about what's our role in relationship, what's our role as stewards of the goods that we come into possession of, that have been made by somebody, that have evolved the use of natural resources from the world. How do we use those goods, those clothing garments well? And then see that they are returned back to the world in a positive way at the end of their use.
Because we've been talking and consumed about this idea that Christianity isn't against pleasure, but it is kind of against the misuse of pleasure. It's not against our pleasures and passions, but the quote that was used, that there are some pleasures in life that maybe come at too great a cost to us, and the people around us, and the earth on which we walk, for us to be engaged. And that quote was from Wendell Berry. So do you think that through the Ethical Fashion Guide, that we're becoming maybe more empowered to say no to fashion that's hurting humans and hurting the planet? And is the Ethical Fashion Guide, I guess, a tool to help us train our pleasures?
Yeah, well, we certainly hope so. That's why we engage in this piece of research each year. Recognise that it's easy to say we're connected in this set of relationships, but it's so hard for us in our everyday lives to work out, how do I see the people who've made the products that I'm buying and wearing? How do I understand the circumstances that they're living and working in? And also the use of natural resources and waste that's been involved in the product that I might be deciding whether or not to buy. And so what the Ethical Fashion Guide and the Ethical Fashion Report do is to give you a really simple tool to get a glimpse of what's happening in the supply chain. And of course, it won't tell you everything about that, but it helps to close that gap, that relationship gap. It helps to put us back into a position where we can start to see what's happened in that supply chain. We can start to see who's made our clothes and what are the conditions that they've worked in. And so it gives us that power, that knowledge, to then be able to make a decision based on some sense of knowledge, some sense of what's gone on in the supply chain that's produced that product that may be sitting on the rack or sitting on the store in front of us that we're considering whether or not we'll buy.
I kind of love that line that you use. So the Ethical Fashion Guide helped close the relationship gap. So if you want to find out more about the Ethical Fashion Guide and the Ethical Fashion Report, you can visit Baptist World Aid's website, and you can also visit the Consumed website for more ideas on how you can engage in this content.